I think there's like a creative thing that I need to do. And like ultimately whatever that is, I'm going to keep pushing my own boundaries. And with like filming and editing, there's a lot of things that have to happen that for it to work. Like the camera has to be in a certain place and the light has to be in a certain place and the audio levels have to be a certain way. But there's also like looking for that little triangle of light in the corner of the room that doesn't seem to matter until you find it. So I think the journey of searching, looking for another flame, I guess. Yeah, like to keep the fire going, I think you need to keep taking steps along the path, whatever that path may be, and just keep discovering things for yourself to improve yourself.
Today on The Flame, I'm joined by my friend, former hockey teammate, and fellow Drexel alum, Bert Archer. Bert is a mechanical engineer turned award-winning cinematographer and editor. He spent years on a path that seemed perfectly mapped out. But after realizing that decades-long projects left him disconnected from the tangible results of his work, he made a bold leap, walking away from engineering altogether to pursue a passion for video and storytelling. Today, Bert is the founder of 15 North Video, creating work for clients like the Philadelphia Flyers, Villanova University, and UFC. And he's living proof that sometimes the best thing you can engineer is your own creative path. Let's get started. Hey, Bert, it's great to see you again.
Hey, Bob, how's it going, man?
Going good. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I know we've been playing a little bit of tag recently. We've both been pretty busy.
Sure, man. Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
For the audience, Bert is as a guy I've known since the late 1900s.
Yes.
Early members of the Drexel Roller Hockey Club. And yeah. Even though we weren't in the same major, we spent plenty of time together at practices, traveling for games, but after graduating, we kept in touch mainly through social media, Facebook, and that kind of thing. But we had the opportunity to catch up last month. Got a cool tour of Bert's studio. But, I'd love, Bert, to have you introduce yourself, talk a little bit about what you're doing right now and what you've been up to recently.
Sure. Thanks, Bob. I'm Bert Archer. I'm a professional freelance cinematographer and video editor. I'm the owner and operator of 15 North Video, which is just a boutique video production company for entertainment and advertising. Mostly I do sports documentaries, which means I'm just following a lot of professional athletes around a lot, interviewing and behind the scenes, fly on the wall stuff. It's the proper term is cinema verite. And I've found a lot of luck in that, both when I started my career in Las Vegas and here in Philadelphia. Locally, I'm very lucky. Everything I get to do and everywhere I get to go and everything I get to see.
That's awesome. And, I've been following a lot of the stuff. And it's funny because when we were in college together, obviously you had an engineering path. And I didn't realize at the time that, you had this you were into video and into, doing, I think you said stand-up comedy, or you were into
Me neither, yeah.
Yeah.
Improv,
yeah. Right? And so I just thought it was so cool. And when we talked, when we got to catch up, your story just blew me away. It was just the coolest thing that you could go from something that seems so different to where you are now. Right. And so part of the podcast here was about my kind of evolution and figuring out where I wanted to go, what I wanted to do with my own career as someone in the creative industry. And it's hard enough being in the industry and trying to figure something out. I can imagine how difficult it was through the years going from, what you thought you wanted to do with your career and with your life and to now where you're at.
Yes, it has been quite a path. Yeah, I've always inclined myself towards math and science, so engineering seemed the way to go. But during that path, I don't know, I guess I became a little bit disillusioned by it, and I needed to do something a little bit more creative.
Right. And when we talked, you kind of mentioned that much of your early professional identity was centered around you becoming an engineer. That's what you wanted to do. That's what you were interested in. You were doing a lot of AP math and science classes, and then obviously Drexel, which is premier engineering school. And then you got Lockheed Martin, which is that's what you're supposed to do, right? That's the career
Yes.
path of an engineer. So like let's start with that. Like what drew you to being engineer, like having that engineering track in the first place?
Sure. So I specifically remember sitting down with the guidance counselor in high school, and I guess I was a junior. And it was probably the only time I ever saw the guidance counselor in high school. And it was to try and decide what I wanted to do after school. And I was like, I don't know, I guess go to college. And she kind of pointed at her papers and said, "You're really good at math and science. Like, is that something you want to continue?" And, in my head, that's the only subjects I really liked.
Right.
My SAT scores certainly showed that. And math and science I was always drawn to. And she said, "Well, you should try being an engineer." And I didn't even know what it was. Junior year of high school, I didn't know what I wanted to do or where I wanted to go. Was doing pretty good in high school, but I had no real aspiration to really just, and everybody in my family's like, "Go to Penn State" or something cool. And I didn't know what to do. And once I started looking into engineering schools, I kind of discovered Drexel along the way. And I think I kind of fell into that. I had friends that were there who, were on the swim team at my high school, at Upper Darby High School, and they were going to Drexel. And I was like, I don't really know what it is, but it's close by enough that I could definitely at least take a tour and check it out and try it out. But yeah, ultimately, like I didn't really have a path until I got there. And I think even getting to Drexel, realistically, it's a 5-year program with co-ops in the middle, and you don't really have to decide which type of engineering you want to do until like your 3rd year,
Okay.
which would fit with me perfectly because at that point I still didn't know what I wanted to do. And I kind of did like a process of elimination of, I don't want to do electrical, I don't want to do material, I don't want to do aerospace, I want to do mechanical engineering. I think there was I liked how difficult the problems were that were still solvable, like mathematically speaking.
Right.
I always thought that was like a really cool challenge, and that is what I gravitated towards. And like I said, it was kind of like a process of elimination, like leading up to even like graduating college. There was a lot of things I didn't want to do, and there was a couple things left that I didn't mind doing. And one of them was mechanical engineering. And there I was graduating with a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering.
Right. That's crazy. And then, so then from Drexel, did you land at Lockheed right out of Drexel? I think a lot of guys ended up at Lockheed.
Pretty
right?
much. Yeah. I remember being in line at the job fair, and the recruiter, there was 50 people in line. I mean, that might be low. And everybody was in line for Lockheed Martin, the Lockheed Martin table. That's where everybody was going. And the recruiter looked at my resume and he said, another person from Drexel. And we were playing hockey, so like I'm risen on people and just I forget what I said specifically, but I kind of just clapped back at him, and he gave me a look, and I think that's what got me like an interview there. I mean, out of all those people, I don't know how many interviews they gave, but they didn't give one to everybody. So I think like just like an attitude thing was kind of what got me in and got me noticed in that thing, because obviously that line was like a photocopy of me, just all these people who wanted to be an engineer at Lockheed Martin.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I guess when you think of somebody who's like an engineer or like even like an accountant, somebody that's working with numbers and math all the time, it almost is, and maybe it's stereotypical. You're not expecting them to have some type of a personality other than like, pushing a pencil, right?
Yeah. My wife still says that. Yeah.
But yeah, so it's your personality showed through and separated you a little bit. And then, so what kind of stuff were you doing for Lockheed?
Even like 20 years later, I don't think I'm allowed to tell you that legally, but I had a great experience there. Like you said, that's like the pinnacle of an engineering job. Like I could have been there forever. I could have just wrote it off and, been totally happy, and even not just money wise, but just the prestige of the job, was awesome. And I met a lot of people in my life where I told them I worked at Lockheed Martin and surprised that I left.
Right.
Even I would probably say that those were the smartest people I've ever met in my entire life. Like, no offense, to you, of course, but
I'm not on
brilliant
that
people.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah, brilliant people. I remember specifically, like I was in design and analysis. So everything that I did was like on 3-dimensional software where, everything was an object and it had to fit together. And then I did like analysis of that object, which is like finite element analysis, which means like when you build your 3-dimensional object, the finite element analysis breaks it down into little cubes or pyramids or whatever. And then it does the math on each one of those blocks and then it puts it all back together and it tells you where it'll break or where it'll fail or get too hot or whatever. And that was a that was the majority of the work that I did there. Yeah.
Thank God for smart people like you, because I don't, I don't know. We wouldn't have anything. I don't know what I would do. But I remember you were saying how it was cool to be there, but then after a while, it seemed like there was a lot of frustration that set in because the projects were really, really long term. So it was like you never got to see
Yeah.
tangible, like finished products, right?
Right. Yeah. It's the Department of Defense, so they're not in a rush.
Right.
And like two quick stories. The first one, I was designing something that had to fit into something small. And it was a whole bunch of like electronic pieces that worked together and it had to fit into something really small. And they gave me the list of things and I, 3D design, putting them all in there and it didn't fit. So I go to my boss and I'm like, it doesn't fit in this container. What do I do? Can I get a bigger container? And like, no, this is the container. It'll fit. No, it won't. Yes, it will. No, it won't. Yes, it will. And then finally, my boss sat me down and he said, if you think about it, this thing isn't going to be made for like 10 years. So all these little electronic parts that you think are this big are going to be this big. So while, it was a little bit discouraging to not be able to figure that out on my own, ultimately, like it made me think beyond designing in 3 dimensions. This is going to sound corny, but now in 4 dimensions, I had to design
Right.
for like time was a factor as well, because like you said, we're not going to build this thing for like 10 years. And for that, like that still is in my mind as like a life lesson. And then like one of my bigger projects that I worked on, I was probably only there for like 3.5 years. But 2 of those years I worked on the same project and it was like a structure that I probably can't tell you about again, but eventually we got it done and it was a team of engineers and we had a leader and a manager and a boss and and all these people, and we finally like presented it to the Navy and everybody was super happy. Congratulations, you got the project, you got the contract, whatever it was. And so the design and analysis part was done, everything was approved. So I turned around and said, okay, well great, well let's go make a prototype, like let's start building this thing. And
Right.
I basically got laughed at. They were like, no, 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 no. Like, that's not you. You're design and analysis. Go back and we'll give you something else to work on the computer. So that was like a realization, number one. And number two, like when I said, well, when can we finally see this thing? They were like, oh, we're not going to build that for like 15 years.
God.
So, there was just like almost like this complete disconnect from the thing that I worked on for 2 years is
Right.
now, like at the end of Indiana Jones, what's the one? Raiders of the Lost Ark, where the guy's pushing the box in the warehouse at the end and it's all boxes in the warehouse. Like that's what it felt like for that project for me. So I shouldn't take it personally, but I kind of did.
And so do you feel like it taught you something about how obviously that kind of creative side of you wanting to see, because as a designer, it's great to like draw something and work on it and figure it out, but then to see it in action and to see it being produced. And like when at Drexel, when I was there, they kept graphic design and web design separate back then. It was, now you kind of have to know how to do everything. You have to know how to do a little bit of motion. You have to know how to do web work. You have to know how to code. And, as a designer today. And I always found that like, I wish I should have taken more web design courses when I was in school, because I found that when I had to do it in the workplace, that I liked being able to figure out how it worked with the code, how it worked with the creative, and then to see it function to make it work. And so it sounds like, you were doing a lot of that type of thing. You were doing a lot of planning and creating, but then you never got to see it. So it was almost like it wasn't feeding that creative need for you, right?
Exactly. Yeah. There was some sort of satisfaction, I guess, I needed at the end. And, that was kind of like almost like the strike two in my head. And I would probably pinpoint the strike three as the day this building that I worked in was the longest hallway I've ever seen in my life, still to this day. Endless hallway. And there was like 3,000 engineers in cubicles in this hallway. And I kind of just looked down this hallway and I was like, there's 3,000 of me here. And, for me, just again, this satisfaction, I mean, like I said, I guess it is a little bit selfish to say this, but that satisfaction of having something working or you're seeing your design done, even in your case, like there's like a little bit of almost like relief when you're done it. And I just never felt like I was done anything there.
Right.
Nothing ever finished.
Now you left Lockheed, right? You went on to another engineering firm.
Yeah,
from there?
I had a grand old plan to make a lot of money by going somewhere else, and that didn't quite work out. But
Right. And that was when you got laid off, right? That was your kind of first
yeah,
experience in being laid off. So tell me about how what that kind of did for your mindset when you had plans that you were working on, and then it seemed like they kind of got pulled out from under you a little bit.
yeah, sure. So yeah, that was a Japanese company that I was working for, and I was the only American engineer. There wasn't a lot of
Right.
engineers in this company. It was a lot
Yeah.
of marketing and sales. So there was really nobody to talk to. It was like a Japanese company where I didn't speak Japanese. I still don't speak Japanese. I faked it every once in a while, but it was tough to just hang out and talk to people. There was no like, water cooler talk. It was just
Right.
business, which is
Right.
fine. I get it. That's a job. But and then like I quenched that relief by living in Center City, Philadelphia in my 20s, my mid 20s to late 20s. And I that kind of like quenched a thirst for like creativity because I would go to work, drive home, and then get on my bike and just like go see a show or go take a class or something like that
Right.
and get away from it all. I think ultimately, like, eventually when I got laid off from there, I knew that I wanted to do something new. And I think along the way, like while I was in Philadelphia, I started taking improv classes. And I think ultimately that was the biggest catalyst in my life to figuring out what I'm doing now was the improv classes.
So let's dive into that a little bit. Like, how did that? Was it just a matter of being able to get away from the structure of the engineering mind and what you have to do on a daily basis, like feeling freer up on stage, feeling like you had to create on the fly and be able to? There was no wrong answer when you're doing improv, right?
Total anonymity.
Yeah.
You can be anybody. You can do anything. You can be anywhere. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? That's what improv is. It's your imagination. And the classes really sparked something in me. I think growing up, like I was always like a goofball, and anyone in my family would agree with me taking improv classes. I should have taken them 15 years earlier.
Right.
Uh, but I think it wasn't even just like being on stage. It was just having fun with friends. Like I was in an
Right.
amazing house team for the Philly Improv Theater called Asteroid for 3 years, 4 years. And we were really good friends that were performing every week. And, there were people there laughing and having a good time with us. And I think that's where like the creative juices started flowing. And even like making our little promos or whatever we were doing, we had ideas for videos. We were all improvisers. So we were all pretty good at communicating, and we would make little videos and I just started editing them. And I think that's kind of where like, the snowball was at the top of the hill and started going down.
Right. So the improv got you were in front of a camera. I guess the engineering brain, it's still equipment, right? It's still something mechanical that you could, take it apart and put it back together if you wanted to.
Yeah, I would point out that I think that like the improv and like making the videos for that was the furthest thing from
Yeah.
engineering. And I
Yeah.
think that's why I liked it.
But it's still a pretty massive shift, right? So like from mechanical engineering to cinematography, it sounds like polar opposites. So was there a moment where you thought like I can actually do this for a career rather than just something for fun as a creative outlet?
Yeah, sure. So I had made a video for a food truck. My friend Sal was doing all the graphics for them. He was a graphic designer, well, is a graphic designer, and they needed a video. And I had a little camera and I went out and filmed something and edited it. And I'm still proud of that video. You know what I mean? This was, I don't know, 15 years ago at least. There was something there that I really wanted to explore and really wanted to do more of, not just
Mhm.
filming, but editing too. Like I had a lot of fun editing that, even though editing might be the most stressful thing I've ever done in my life. There's a joy to it. And also at the end of that project, I had a tangible
Nice.
thing to show people.
Yes.
So there was an instant satisfaction that I can go out and film something and then edit it and then deliver something. And there is something exists. I understand it's ones and zeros, it's digital, but at the same time, like I felt really good about that. And I think that was like kind of the first thing that led me down the road.
Mhm.
But when I got laid off, I had a friend in Las Vegas who had cameras and a production company. I met him at Drexel and I went out to Vegas to work with him. So I moved to Las Vegas
Wow.
after I got laid off and I gave it a shot. Admittedly, it didn't work the first year, but I kept going. I think there's an analogy of when you jump off a cliff and you build a plane on the way down. That's the entrepreneurial
Right.
anecdote, but I think I didn't even know I had to build a plane. Again, this is me not having a plan again, jumping off the cliff. But, eventually I made some wings, I guess.
Talk about the ultimate improv, right? I mean,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
that's crazy. And so you were out, how long were you out in Vegas for? Or out in, yeah, right? You were out in Vegas for a little
Yeah.
while?
7.5 years I was there, man.
Oh, wow. So you kind of were like, all right, you had no choice. Like you had to make it work, right?
Sure. So, with my engineering background, a majority of my work at the beginning, I was an assistant cameraman and a DIT. So, assistant cameraman makes sure the camera works. You know what I mean? As a mechanical engineer, I could take the camera apart and put it back together again, and it'll still work. And an assistant cameraman makes sure the lenses are on and the microphone and the monitor and the battery and everything's ready to go for the camera guy to work. Right? That's what an assistant cameraman is. And then, like DIT, which is digital imaging technician, at its core, the person who offloads the media and puts it on a hard drive so everybody feels safe about what they just filmed. And that was a computer job. So I had basically the least creative jobs on set, but like the most mechanically inclined. And with all due respect to people who go to film school, like I had an advantage over them with that. So I was getting really cool gigs, like right off the bat with like Caesars Entertainment and, Showtime All Access, where I was an assistant cameraman and a DIT, where I had these responsibilities, and it granted me like amazing opportunities. And I met a lot of cool people that really just shaped the entire future of my career.
So in a way, you were still doing what you knew, what you had been professionally trained to do, was using your, I guess, engineering mindset to fit into this new kind of career that you found yourself in.
Solving problems. I think
Yeah,
ultimately, like when I left engineering and my dad basically paid for my entire college career and I wasn't using it, like ultimately it wasn't about the difficult math and science that I learned at Drexel. It was
right.
my ability to solve problems on a highly technical level.
Yeah, I mean that's what we do as designers, as creative people. Like it's just a creative problem solving. So you were out there for, you said 7.5 years, and then what brought you back to did you go somewhere else before you left Vegas, or you came back to the Philly area
I
after
tried to
Vegas?
convince my wife to move to Colorado. No offense, Pennsylvania, but I wanted to try one more place before we
Right,
came back. Yeah, like my career path, like in Vegas, I was an AC and a DIT during the day, but I bought my own camera and was making my own episodes of Showtime All Access at night with my friends, where they're building their race cars or whatever, playing hockey. I had a hockey YouTube channel for a while and stuff like that. And I was just filming things and creating episodes and using that to kind of get into like bigger productions and people to hire me as a camera guy or a director of photography. And then once we moved back, I kind of just dropped the assistant cameraman and DIT and just kind of sold myself as a director of photography because
right,
I was getting the reps in with my own camera. And when I was an AC, like I was working on like Showtime All Access, like those guys are like inspirational
right,
with how good they are at making Emmy awards. You know what I mean? Like
right.
I learned how to make Emmy awards from every angle of everything, like just behind the scenes sports stuff. Like I was like bathed in it, and a lot of lessons were learned. And I was very confident that I could do the entire workflow at that point.
Was there a point where you felt like you got almost like your big break when it came to that stuff? Like you'd put in the time learning it, doing your own versions of All Access with your friends. Was there one thing that led to you landing? I know you did a lot of travel with UFC and with Floyd and all that stuff. Like, was there a point where you felt like, I think I just got my break?
I always said that was going to be whatever the next gig is, that's the big break.
Right.
So I never felt like I got there. But I did have a realization recently. I'm working on a full length feature documentary for the Philadelphia Flyers that will be out in like April of 2026. During the editing of this, I kind of had like a little bit of like almost like a panic attack because when I make those videos with my friends in their race cars, or even when I make like even like television shows for Villanova basketball, for me, when I'm editing it and I'm doing it, and this seems incredibly selfish again, but I'm doing it for me. Like I have the mental just thought of nobody's ever going to watch this. It's just for me, and I'll just make it how I want it. And that's how I've just lived my life as an editor. But when we were making this Flyers film, and the director was super excited, and he was really happy with the story itself and how the movie was turning out, it had a realization of, somebody else is going to watch this. And he says, there's going to be 1,000 people at the premiere and everybody's going to see it. And that's when I really started getting nervous. And I think it was really editing this film where I had just a realization of times they are changing.
Right. And it's funny, like, and I guess it's because it's kind of, your hometown area, your hometown hockey team, and you're feeling like that's a big deal for you personally. But it wasn't, even working on the Showtime and the UFC stuff and all that was not, you didn't get that same sense doing it out there.
No, those were huge. Like I said, it was always the next one. You know what I mean? So for me, when I first started working with the UFC, I was a post-production manager for a show called Embedded. And Embedded is like a fly on the wall, vlog style 24 hours show, which means it comes out every 24 hours on fight week. So it's like super high pressure situations.
Intense.
And I was traveling a lot and I was literally sitting ringside for every UFC pay-per-view for like 2 straight years. So for me, like it's amazing. Like, don't get me wrong, like those were huge breaks and massive gigs. Like those were the coolest thing I could have asked for. And, like I've always had pretty good seats at everything I've done, even when I was in Vegas and I was Caesars Entertainment, like when I was an assistant cameraman, we would be responsible for like these big 5-camera shoots for like opening night of like, J-Lo and Mariah Carey and Backstreet Boys and Gwen Stefani and all these cool gigs. And as an assistant cameraman, like, you build the cameras and then the cameras are ready. So you don't have anything to do during the show. But I convinced the director that he needed an AC like in the pit, like in the security area in the pit. So I sat front row and watched, like Gwen Stefani like perform. So for me, yeah, like I feel like I've made it a lot of times, just because I've been in a lot of cool places and seen a lot of cool
really
stuff.
Cool.
Super lucky, man.
Did you ever get like starstruck, like the part, the celebrity or person? Does that ever wear off?
It happens all the time. Like, honestly, probably my biggest one, honestly, was Patrick Waugh. I sat near him on a plane ride from Vegas to Philly, and I turned to my friend. I'm like, "That's Patrick Waugh," and he goes, "Who's Patrick Waugh?" And I went up and talked to him eventually, but yeah, I was super Star Trek. So I was a big No Doubt fan in high school too. I had like 3 copies of Tragic Kingdom. One was in my car, one was in my CD player, one was in my home stereo.
Right.
So when we got to interview Gwen Stefani and she walked right by me, I was kind of like, and I froze with her around. But ultimately, like a lot of times, like when I'm doing, like when I have to follow like high championship professional athletes and people that are under like immense pressure for things like that, I think I avoid it at all costs because the camera gig is technically like fly on the wall. Like they're not supposed to know I'm there. So if I could just stay as far away as possible, but still capture everything I need to do, I think that's the ideal scenario.
That's pretty cool. The closest I've come to a singing professional through 6 degrees of separation is the fact that Pink is from Doylestown, went to CB and one of her best friends growing up when she was in high school lived in the house I live in right now. So one of my neighbors was like, Pink's been in your house before. Like,
okay,
pretty cool.
That's not even a full 6 degrees. Like that's only a couple degrees, bro. You're right on.
Yeah. She's probably, stood where I'm sitting right now at some point, but it's just, cheesy connection. So so you're done with Vegas. So you come back to Philly, and do you open the studio right away? Like what gigs were you working on, or how did you know when it was time to open up your own studio?
It was years later, man. Yeah. When I first moved back, I was struggling to keep all of my old clients because I was in Vegas. Like it was like the center of the fight world. You know what I mean? Right. So nobody was going to call me to fly me back to Vegas to do a gig because there was people like me all over the valley. So they didn't need me there. I did a lot of just like as much editing and, like productionhub.com and the Greater Philadelphia Film Office. And I did a lot of like SEO work for my website. So I always had my feet on the ground and I was always running, but I didn't necessarily have a lot of steady work when I first moved back. But I quickly established myself as like one of the few people on the East Coast that was able to do the genre that I do, this cinema verite. And through connections and calling a lot of people and emailing a lot of people, I was able to start filming stuff. A lot of it was like corporate stuff. And by corporate stuff, I mean like, like the CEO of a company needed to do an address, and great, I have a camera and a light, and a teleprompter and audio gear. Like I could do all that stuff. So I was answering a lot of those calls when I first moved back.
Was there ever a point where you were thinking that you may have to go back to an engineering gig? or you may have to fall back on that?
So, yeah. So in Vegas, 7 years, right? First year didn't work at all. Like I couldn't figure it out. I did make a lot of money, lost a lot of money. It was weird. So that first year in Vegas, I got an engineering job. It was at a
Oh,
trash bag factory. It was plastics, you know what I mean? So they needed an engineer and it was a great job. It was a fantastic job and they listened to me, which is
half the
another
battle.
mechanical engineering dream,
Right.
but about 10 months into that job. So I worked as for about a year trying to get my name in the bag, but just wasn't making enough money and losing too much. And then I got the steady paycheck again with engineering. And then like 11 months into that job, I got a phone call from like this producer. Her name's Alicia Zubikowski, and she's a former NFL Films, like 11-time Emmy Award winning executive producer of Showtime All
Just
Access
happened
and
to give
good
you a
friends
call
with
on the phone.
Right. Yeah. So she calls me and of course I picked that up and, she was like, I want you to film this web series about this pop star, and it was like 2 weeks of work, and then I said, I was
Mhm.
like, if I edit it too, I'll do it. So I got myself like 4 weeks of work. And then I walked into my boss's office and I was like, hey, listen, I would love to give you 2 weeks notice, but I got to get on a plane and go to LA tomorrow. And that guy never talked to me again. And I knew ultimately like that was the end of engineering. Like I
Right.
had to figure it out after that because I couldn't take a year off from engineering, trying to do something else, work for a year and then leave for a month and then go do
Right.
something else and come back to it all. Like
Right.
explaining that in a job interview would be impossible.
Right. Yeah. So you were just like, no, this is it. I'm gonna make this work, and it became your passion, right? You were almost forced into it, but you jumped on the opportunity at the same time and made it work.
I'd also like to shout out to Jill, my wife, for allowing me to try and do this again, considering it didn't work the first time.
I'll tell you what, there's nothing like a good support system, right? Being myself, being out of full-time work for a year and a half and starting a podcast because I needed some type of creative outlet and trying to start my own business. And, my wife has been incredibly supportive.
Great.
It's almost, it's emotional. Like sometimes you don't even realize that like, hey, I'm stressed from trying to find work or trying to do all this stuff, but all I feel is support from my significant other. Right. And so I remember
Yes.
going out to dinner with her not too long ago and being like, I appreciate you so much for supporting me through all this stuff. So it's cool to hear that Jill, you have that support system with your wife.
Yeah. Shout out to Jill. Thank you, honey.
So you got 15 North now. You got this dream project with the Flyers, which is so cool. And speaking of hockey and Patrick Paul, did you see him last night on the game?
I saw a video of him yelling at somebody.
Yeah, he was going red face. I forgot he was coaching the Islanders now.
Yes. Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
saw that
Me
play,
too.
and they're like, yeah, he's normally not like that on the bench, but he was giving it to them.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. He was cool. I made a joke about Chris Osgood and he was like, you need some better jokes, just brushed me off. And he didn't laugh at the joke that I said to him. Is
I
basically the
love the
story.
dry hockey humor. The hockey guys are the funniest, aren't they?
Yes. For sure, man. Yeah.
So you've been interviewing a lot of the Flyers alumni for your video, for your movie.
Yeah. Yeah. We got all the Broad Street bullies.
That's awesome. Who's got the most? Did you get to talk to Bernie before he passed?
I did. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I don't know the timing of this podcast, but there's a memorial service of his coming up soon. And
Okay.
I got invited to go because I made a short little video from the interview that we got to do with him last year at his house in Avalon for the film. Somebody asked me the other day, like, what was your favorite interview? And I said, my favorite interview was Bernie, but it was also probably the worst interview we did because myself and the director were just totally geeking out. Like we didn't really ask any pertinent questions or things that were necessary for the film. Cause I was just, I had a 10-minute conversation with him after we were done the interview about hockey. And it was absolutely amazing.
That's awesome. I've run into Bernie a number of times throughout the years, whether it was at the skate zone rink or I was at a Flyers game one time and I had box seats and him and the Hound came, they would do the rounds, right? They go do the rounds and talk to people. And it's so funny because they just walk in and then it's like, oh, there's Bernie. And, he's like the mascot for the Flyers. He just would go in and just talk to everybody like he knew you, which was amazing. But the one of my favorite times of meeting him was I was living in Chalfont at the time, and there's an ice cream parlor called Oh Wow Cow, and we walk in and there's Bernie sitting there holding court with like a young girls softball team. Like he was in there getting ice cream with his wife, and I guess the one of the coach was the softball team was like, "Oh my God, this is Bernie." So he's talking to these girls, and showing them the ring and everything, and they have no clue who Bernie is, right? So we walk in and we're like, "Oh, hey, Bernie," and he comes over, and my father-in-law's with us, and he's a Rangers fan. So I go, "Bernie, I married into my father-in-law is a Rangers fan." He's like, "Oh, really?" He's like, "Why don't you try this on?" He takes his Flyers ring off and hands it to him to put it on. But he was one of a kind, that guy.
Yeah, I got my picture with him and he let me put on both rings, and I showed somebody that picture and I'm like, "Look, I got both of his rings on." And then the guy flipped through his phone. He goes, "I got the same picture." Oh, okay.
That's because Bernie was a man. He made everybody his friend.
For sure. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I loved him. Yeah.
So that drops in April. Is that the movie drops in April?
Yeah. I'm not sure how much I'm allowed to talk about this, but
that's it. No, that's okay. It's cool that you're doing that. And it's kind of a passion project. I can imagine doing that and getting to meet all those guys. And so I guess it's a good opportunity to ask about now your creative process. So from coming up with the idea of something like this to the final edit, like talk about what you love the most about the creative process.
Sure. I stick with sports a lot because in sports, there's like a winner and a loser. So there's a story no matter what. And I think I really like to do documentaries because a majority of the discovery happens during the edit. And I really enjoy that as well. I think as far as like creative process for something like this, a lot of it was just interviews, so a big part of the creative process was to kind of research. So the movie is about a single game that happened in 1976 and watching the game and researching the game. And there's a lot of historical things that happen in this game and a lot of it involved. So for this particular project, it was knowing the subject matter. It was knowing the story kind of before we told it. And a documentary could be about anything, anybody's journey that might not have an end. And we were lucky that this story particularly, it was a game, so it had an ending. But I think as far as like creative process, I love getting into a room and figuring out best possible angles to film an interview, not just capturing somebody, but making it look beautiful. I remember when I was an AC in Vegas and we were doing I think it was like an ESPN 30 for 30. And I was with this director of photography. His name's Steve LeMay, and amazing guy. He's like my idol, but I'm pretty sure I'm older than him. And I was his AC and I had to carry around this big Dana dolly. And a Dana dolly is basically like two big pipes with a platform on it, and the camera goes on it and it slides like really smoothly across the room, and these can be like 10 feet long. And we're in like a little hotel room and we're just shooting like B-roll for some weird spot in the film. And I set it up and and he's talking to the producer and I was like, "Okay, we're ready." And he goes, No, I want the Dana dolly to end here." And I was like, "Okay, sure." So I move it around and it's super heavy and I got it and "Okay, Steve, we're ready." And he goes, "No, it has to end right here." And he was super adamant about it. And I was like, "Okay," did my best, got it there. And and I kind of just like shrugged at him. And finally he came over and like moved it himself and moved the camera over. And he goes, "Look at this. You see that triangle of light that's appearing when we get to this frame? That's where I want it to end." And there was another one of those like fourth dimensional moments where I realized that he saw something beyond that I did. And that unlocked something in me where it occurred to me there's more to it than just like capturing the video and audio. Like you can make it look beautiful. This was literally like a 10-second shot of a hotel room, maybe 10 seconds. That's in a half-hour episode of something. And it was an empty hotel room. It wasn't even like anything really interesting, but he made it gorgeous. He made it beautiful. And so for me, like that was like a huge lesson in the path that I was going as far as like just filming things creatively. Like I said, I'm an editor because I had to be an editor originally, but that might be like a majority of my work now is editing.
Are there any similarities that you've seen over the years for what makes a great, because you said some incredible people at Lockheed and in the engineering world, and now, great cinematographers. Is there any correlation between what makes somebody great in their profession, whether it's an engineer or cinematographer that you've learned?
Sure. I mean, like I said, there are people out there that see things that I don't see. And I think that there's just like a higher understanding of things, and it might go beyond like an understanding, but like an appreciation. They respect what they're doing. And that respect level is so high that they can reach a little bit further and try a little bit harder and discover things along the way. And I think that's a big part of it. Like even in like improv and acting and cinematography and editing and engineering is like discovery, is figuring something out new and finding something new and learning something new is a huge part of it. And I feel like that's kind of like my favorite part of this thing is I can just try something and it doesn't work. I try something else. I try something, I try something else. Probably like the number one keystroke while I'm editing is undo. You know what
Right.
I mean? Try it, nope, undo. Try it, nope, undo. Undo, undo. Okay, that'll work. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So I'm a big fan of just like throwing darts, man. Like I'll throw a dart, whether it's bullseye or not, and just keep throwing them.
What's the Gretzky saying? You miss 100% of the chances shots you don't take, or something
Yeah,
like that.
exactly. Yeah.
For my audience, or who I've tried to connect with, are people that are, either out of work and struggling to try to figure out what it is they want, or it could be somebody who is in a job that they hate and they're afraid to make the leap to start something new. And it sounds like your career path has taken a lot of courage to make those changes and kind of take those leaps to kind of go for it, right? Is there something that, I guess, first of all, like, where do you find that? Is that just something that your nature, your personality, where you're just, like you said, you'll figure it out and you're not afraid to fail? And then kind of the second part of that is, what's some advice, or what would you say to someone who's maybe in that similar situation, who's kind of like, I don't think this is where I want to be. I want to make a change, and is afraid to make that leap.
Sure. I mean, the first part of that question, I could probably relate to hockey. I'm a goaltender. My entire job is to make sure the puck doesn't go in the net, right? That's the goalie. That's your job on the ice. But I mean, geez, I've let up hundreds of thousands of goals in hundreds of thousands of different angles. And I think just going out there and standing in front of the net is honorable and it takes courage. And I think that's kind of where everything really starts. I think the courage to go out there and to just don't wait for the tides, just dip your toes in, I think is like the best analogy I can give. I think for me, like I said at the beginning, like about I didn't know what I wanted to do in high school. Like I'm still not sure. Like I'm still figuring it out. And I think that's what I enjoy the most is you said, what's the one thing you did that, that you knew you made it? And it's the next one. And I think, ultimately, if you try, there can't be anything negative about that. It's either you do it or you learn. And back to hockey, it's the same thing. Like even when I play shinny and I'm just playing open hockey and I'm on my angle and the guy shoots it and it goes in and I turn around and I try and figure out my angle. Like, how did I let that
Right.
in or why did I make a mistake there? And then you learn and move on because ultimately, like the worst thing you can do, and I'm using more hockey analogies, is letting in the next shot. That's the one thing you don't want to do is just let in 2 shots in a row or 3 shots in a row or 4 shots in a row. But ultimately, like as a goaltender and as a freelance, whatever you're trying to do, it might happen. It's going to happen. There's like
Right.
months where I haven't had work and it is scary. But I think the things you learn along the way by trying, by having the courage to stand out there
Right.
is what people notice the most. And that's why I think I get I get phone calls again and then people call me back because, I'm out there. I'm putting my foot forward and I'm trying to just get better at it every day,
Right.
considering, how far I've come. Like I'm still taking steps forward. And I guess that would be my bit of advice is just keep moving forward. And if you let up the last shot, the next save's going to be great.
Right. I think people recognize through, like you said, back to that interview you had when you're standing in line with Lockheed, is, there was something about, your personality or how you approached that person that made you memorable, or I think people can sense, people that are genuine and people that are hard workers. So like you said, if you're showing up and you're working on making those adjustments and just continuing to try to better yourself, people recognize that, and people want to continue to work with people that are like that.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. It's very like Gary V. The only failure you can have is not trying.
Yeah, right.
He has a lot of motivational things like that.
Right. So I guess kind of to end on a positive, kind of a cheesy note, I have this whole thing. Obviously, the name of the podcast is The Flame, and it was the idea for that for me came from, you talk about the spark. You've got this idea, the spark, but then like what happens after there's that spark? Well, if you're lucky enough, you get a flame. And the idea was to kind of like, how do you keep that going? So, You've said multiple times to me tonight, the greatest thing you can do is the next thing. So when you think about your journey from where you were as an engineer to now having relationships with celebrities and working with them, now to, producing this kind of passion project with flyers, like, has your definition of keeping your flame lit changed? Like, what does that mean to you now?
Wow, that's great. I love that. I think there's like a creative thing that I need to do. And like ultimately, whatever that is, I'm gonna keep pushing my own boundaries. And with like filming and editing, there's a lot of things that have to happen that for it to work. Like the camera has to be in a certain place and the light has to be in a certain place and the audio levels have to be a certain way. But there's also like looking for that little triangle of light in the corner of the room that doesn't seem to matter until you find it. So I think the journey of searching, looking for another flame, I guess. Yeah, like to keep the fire going, I think you need to keep taking steps along the path, whatever that path may be, and just keep discovering things for yourself to improve yourself. And for me personally, like I think that's a big part of it. Like I love editing because I can shape and mold the story any way I can. And along the way I discover things and I'm able to use those things hopefully in a creative way to just expand what I'm used to doing. There's a beginning, middle, and end. Like, well, what if I mold it to go around this way? And there's a little vignette and a little story behind that way. Like just pushing boundaries and almost, just molding the dough in a different way every time you cook the pizza. Sorry, is that too many analogies? I feel like I just did.
Oh my God.
I feel like there's like three analogies in one sentence.
I mean, this is like the most analogy filled, but that's where hockey brains go, right? There's always some type of an analogy with hockey. I love it. So Bert, it was great catching up with you again. And thank you for dropping some wisdom on us. Where can people get in touch with you and your studio if they want to work with you?
Sure. I'm Bert Archer. 15 North Video is my website and LLC. That's my creative outlet, I guess, if it were. And 15 North Studio, you can find us on Instagram around Bert 15 North, 15 as in 15. And yeah, we're all over the place.
That's awesome. Yeah. Thanks again for being on the show. And I look forward to maybe being able to watch that movie about
for sure, man,
in the future. So
yeah, thanks a lot, Bob. Good times, man.
Take care, Bert.
Cheers.
Thanks to my friend Bert Archer for being a guest on today's show. And thank you for joining me on the Flame Podcast. There's definitely more to come. Please take a moment to follow, subscribe, or hit the like button if you haven't done so already. And if you have any feedback or would like to be a guest on the show, send me a message at talk@theflamepod.com. I would love to hear from you.